Hey guys, so today I'm going to be doing my March wrap up, and this has felt like the longest month. I was looking back at my list of books that I've read this month, and the books that I read at the start of the month feels like so long ago. I think I've just had a really stressful month with uni and stuff, so I'm really kind of glad, to be honest, that March is over, and then we're going into April. We're going into autumn in New Zealand, which is my favourite season. But I did read some really amazing books in March. As usual though, I'm going to start with my least favourite books and work my way up to my most favourite. So my first 2-star read for the month was Night Film by Marisha Pessl. This one I've returned back to the library, but it really just wasn't a book for me, I think. This one is an adult thriller kind of novel. It's about a film director whose daughter commits suicide, but a journalist thinks that she didn't commit suicide and that the director guy had something to do with it. He's a horror director, so the journalist is very suspicious of him and decides to investigate. The kind of witchy elements to the book, if you've read it you know what I mean, those parts I really liked, but otherwise I just really didn't enjoy this book at all. The story was very formulaic, which I really don't like in thriller type books normally. What would happen was that they would go to a particular person to ask for information. The person would initially refuse to give them any information, and then 5 seconds later be totally happy to share their entire life story and all the information that the journalist could possibly want. And then that person's information would lead them to the next person to ask, and the same thing would happen again, which kind of makes it predictable as well, and it just too convenient. Italics were grossly overused in this book. I really don't like gimmicky writing style things like that. It also came off to me as misogynistic, racist and transphobic as well, and in terms of those things there was no acknowledgement of it and no pushback from the other characters to show that those things are wrong. It was kind of just there. The story for me wasn't believable. Like I said, it was very convenient all the time and I hated the ending, but I know a lot of people love this book, so if you love it, that's fine. It just definitely wasn't for me. My other 2-star read for the month is one that I had to read for uni. This was for my 20th century literature class, and I was kind of expecting possibly to like this one, but I really didn't, and that is A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. This is essentially a coming of age type novel. It follows a boy from his very early childhood up until his adulthood, and just kind of, it's like the story of how he became an artist, but it just deals with a lot of events from childhood and his youth and things like that. I just found it extremely dull. It's one of those books that is essentially character driven, but you know, that's normally something that I like. I just didn't find the character interesting, I guess, so I just couldn't get into this book whatsoever. There's also a lot of focus on Irish politics, which is just something that I have no interest in. It's not something I know anything about, and reading about things like that, like political situations that you don't know anything about in a fictional context, is really boring. There's a lot of dialogue in this book, but they don't use speech marks for dialogue, which I found really irritating. They would just use like a new line and then put it like a dash in front of it. The childhood section at the very beginning of the book was the most interesting part for me. I thought I was gonna like the rest of the book, but it just, nothing happened. I can see why it's a modernist classic, but it's definitely not a book that I'll be rereading ever again. I had one 3-star read this month, which was one that I read for the rereadathon, which I have a separate wrap up for, so I'm going to be linking that down below, but that 3-star read was Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, and I've unhauled that book because yeah, it was the second time I'd read it and I just still didn't love it. If you want to hear more about why I don't like that book so much, why it was the 3-star read for me, what I do like about it, you can go check out my rereadathon wrap up. Next I have 2 4-star reads, and these were both like high 4 stars. So the first one was Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. I spoke about this in a reading vlog that I did this month, so you can check that out if you want to hear like my thoughts as I went along reading this book. It was my first John Green book that I've ever read, so I was impressed with it. This book I felt did a very good and therefore very unsettling job of putting the reader in the shoes of someone with OCD. It's something that I don't have any experience with, but this book was almost like distressing to read because it was so good at making you feel the way that the character feels. It deals with some really complicated issues as well. It gets a bit philosophical, which I liked. It deals with the idea of self and selfhood, and it also acknowledges the fact that there kind of aren't always answers to those types of questions. A lot of people say that John Green like gives his characters voices that are like too wise for teenagers, but I think these are things that teenagers are interested in, at least when I was a teenager, I would have those types of discussions with people sometimes. So yeah, I like that. As I mentioned in my reading vlog, there were a lot of things in this, like references made to stuff that I was studying in uni at the time, which was really, really weird. So I really like those type of synchronicities as well. It like has nothing to do with the book really, but it just happened that a lot of the references in this book were really relevant to me at the moment, which is always kind of satisfying. So yeah, overall I liked this book quite a lot. It's basically about a girl who is dealing with OCD, but there's also like a mystery where this guy has gone missing and there's like a big reward to find him, and she happened to know his son, so she's trying to get close to him again, basically to try and get the reward. So there's kind of that plot going on as well, but it's definitely more just about her own mental health, I guess. My other 4-star read for the month was another one that I had to read for uni, and that was The Colour Purple by Alice Walker. This was another really good book. It's set in the kind of deep American South shortly after World War I, and it follows a black woman called Celie and just dealing with, you know, the men in her life and that kind of thing. It also has parts that are set in Africa, which was really interesting. It deals with intersectional feminism really well, which is like the subject matter that my class has been looking at. The whole thing is written as an epistolary, so it's letters between Celie and her sister, or Celie, and she also writes like in a prayer kind of form, like to God. I think that was a really good format. You really get inside Celie's head because it's just her writing down like all of her feelings about everything that's happening. So I found that really, really interesting. I really liked the writing style. I think it really puts you in Celie's shoes. The kind of reason that I gave it 4 stars rather than 5 stars is that I found it very, very slow, especially towards the end of the book. It spans many, many, many years, which I didn't kind of think it would. So yeah, I just found it a bit slow, and I would also include a trigger warning for rape from like the very first page. So if that's something that you don't want to be dealing with, then avoid this book because it's quite descriptive, I guess. But yeah, a really fantastic book anyway if you're interested in intersectional feminism. So next I have a whole bunch of 5-star reads. I had so many 5-star reads this month, which is amazing. Part of that was because of the rereadathon, so I was rereading books that I liked that were already 5 stars and I already knew they would be. The first one is Molly Moon Stops the World by Georgia Bing. This is a childhood favourite of mine about a girl hypnotist. In this one, her and her friend Rocky go to LA to try and stop this guy who's pretty much trying to take over the world, and it's really, really amazing. And if you want to hear more about it, you can check out my rereadathon wrap up. The other book that I reread for the rereadathon that I rated 5 stars again was Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. I actually just finished rereading this last night and I love every second of this book. It was such a pleasure to reread. It's only the second time that I'd read it, so I really, really enjoyed the reread. There were things that I noticed that I hadn't really like noticed the first time around. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on this one as well, you can check out that wrap up. Another book that I reread that I gave 5 stars this month was The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. This was the Classics Clique book of March. This was the first book that we ever read together. This was a reread for me. I'd read this book like quite a few times before, but I have done a review on it, so if you want to hear more thoughts on this book as well, you can check out the review, which I will link down below. The Classics Clique book for April, by the way, is going to be Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which I'm super excited about because I've heard amazing things about that book. I also have a review up for the next book that I rated 5 stars, and that is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. This is another one that I had to read for uni because it is a feminist dystopian kind of book. It deals with a world in the not too distant future where women's rights are pretty much completely taken away and they get divided into different like categories. Some women, their sole purpose is basically to bear children for other people. Some women are solely wives, and some women are solely like maids and housekeepers, that kind of thing. So this was a really, really good book. If you want to hear more of my thoughts about it, you can check out my review as well. And another one that I have a review up of that was a 5-star read as well was Obsidio by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This is the conclusion to the Illuminae Files series, and I loved this book so much. It was amazing. The Illuminae Files is a YA sci-fi series that is in a dossier format, so it's all like documents and things like that. It's an incredible series, and this book was a fantastic conclusion to it. So if you want to see my review of this, that will be linked down below as well. And I have one more 5-star book that I reviewed too. I've reviewed a lot of 5-star books this month, and I love that because I like being able to tell you guys all of my thoughts when I've loved a book. I think it's really nice. So the last one that I reviewed that was 5 stars was The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. This is a YA contemporary novel. It's inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement, and it follows a girl called Star who witnesses one of her best friends getting shot by police. With this book, I had really high expectations going into it, and it surpassed them, which really impressed me. I think it dealt with the issue really well, but it also was just a fantastically written book, and I loved the characters and everything. It was just a pleasure to read overall, and really changed my perspective in a way as well. Like, I feel like I learnt a lot from it. So that review will be linked down below as well in case you want to check that one out. And then I have one more 5-star read for the month, which is one that I didn't review, and that book is Wild Sargasso Sea by Jean Reese. This is a very short novel. It's another one that I had to read for uni, and it's basically a kind of prequel to Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I don't want to say too much about the plot or anything in case you haven't read Jane Eyre, but I highly recommend, if you have read Jane Eyre, pick up this book because I think it will really interest you. If you haven't read Jane Eyre, I recommend reading Jane Eyre because that's an amazing classic as well, and then pick up this one afterwards. It's really short, so it's definitely worth the read. I just love the backstories that the characters got in this book. It really kind of changed my perspective of the characters in a way, or maybe not changed my perspective but kind of broadened my perspective. It makes you realize how much you didn't know about these characters really. Like, there's kind of a lot of gaps that are like filled in with this book, and obviously it's Jean Reese's own interpretation of those characters, but it kind of makes you realize, I don't know, you don't know everything about someone, because there are characters in Jane Eyre that you kind of think you know, and then you read this book and you're like, wow, they have lots of potential backgrounds, I guess, and this is like just one version of it. And it kind of shows you the assumptions that you make about people when you don't know everything about them. So yeah, I think that was really interesting. This book is set in Jamaica, and I loved that as a setting. I thought that was really interesting and really cool as well, and I really liked the writing style. It's told in multiple point of views, and I think that really worked with this book, and I really liked it. I highly recommend this book if you've read Jane Eyre. It's awesome. So those are all of the books that I read throughout March. I feel like I read so many 5-star reads, which is awesome. Love when that happens. And yeah, make sure you go check out those reviews if you want to hear more about some of these books, and check out my rereadathon wrap up if you want to hear more about those favorites of mine as well. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in a couple of days with my April TBR. Bye.